Hey everyone, my name is Danielle and welcome back to my channel. Today I am finally here with my October wrap up. I've tried to record this video like 3 times now. I can never get my thoughts across correctly, so this will be my final attempt, even if I don't like the results. For the month of October, I ended up reading 17 books, which is a lot more than I was expecting because October I had a really bad reading slump for the first basically half of that month. I really struggled to read, but it did pick up in the second half. So I was able to read 17 books, which was a total of 4,603 pages. And I did end up reading a lot of audiobooks again for about 55 hours worth of audiobooks. For the genres that I read, this was definitely my horror and fantasy era because I had 2 sci-fi, 7 fantasy, and 8 horror. And that was the only kind of books that I read this month, were basically fantasy and horror. Horror I understand because it's October and I was gearing most of my reading towards spooky reads. And I'm very excited that fantasy is up there because I've missed reading a fantasy. It was just so nice to read so many fantasy books. For the formats that I read these book in, I read 4 ebooks, 5 physical, and again, I read a lot of audio, so I read 8 audiobooks. For my ratings, I had 2 2 stars, 8 3 stars, 4 4 stars, and I actually came out with 3 5 stars this month. So I am having much better reading than I did in the earlier months of this year, so I am happy about having 3 5 stars. One thing that I'm not as happy about is I am not reading the physical books that I own on my TBR upstairs. I just cannot seem to will myself to read any of those books. So the only books that I read that actually were on my physical TBR were these 3. I only read 3 of them, and I'm pretty sure this one, and actually this one I've only bought in the last couple months. So yeah, I'm not doing too great with reading books that I actually own. The way that I'm gonna structure this is I think I'm just gonna go with what I read at the beginning of the month and what I finished with, because otherwise I will forget books, and I have done that quite a few times. So I have them all listed in front of me, so we're just gonna start with what I started the month off with, if I cannot drop it, and go to my last book. So I started the month reading Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the sequel to Black Sun, and this is a pre-Columbian inspired fantasy series that follows a few different characters in this kind of holy city of Tova. It has to do with the end of an era, coming of a new era, creating gods, and there is some characters in this one that I actually loved a lot more in this novel than I did in the previous one. Narampa has become one of my favorite characters. And something that I love about this series, it is kind of a darker fantasy, but it always goes in directions that I'm just not really expecting. I've read a lot of fantasy in my life, and this one still surprises me. It just kind of takes it in a slightly different direction that I'm just really not expecting. I do feel like they are a little slower than I'm used to, but there is some really amazing things that happened in this book. I didn't love one of the characters, Serapio, in this book as much as I enjoyed him in the first book, but I love the dynamics that are happening between a lot of these characters, how the plot is moving in this story. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but I feel like once I read the 3rd book, I'm gonna wanna reread this series, and I feel like it has the potential of becoming one of my favorite series because I am just really enjoying the reading process, and I want the next book to come out like right now. The next book that I listened to was Goddess of Filth by Bea Castro. This is a horror novella that follows these 5 girls who are on their way to leaving for college. They have this get together where they decide to do kind of a summoning ritual, and one of them ends up getting possessed by this entity. This entity kind of teaches this girl how to be herself, how to understand her body, her femininity, and her sexuality, while some of her other friends are trying to figure out why she's acting different, what is going on with her. And this was a really uniquely done story. I wish it was longer. I really would have loved to have more time with some of the side characters because this focused very heavily on the girl that was possessed, Fernanda, and then the main character, I think her name was Lourdes, I believe was her name, and then their friendship, on how they were going to try to help her. Even though this entity wasn't necessarily malicious, she just wanted, kind of fed off of Fernanda and her becoming more understanding of her body. And I really enjoyed this. At first, when I first read it, I gave it like a 3.5. I have bumped that up to a 4 because the story really stuck with me. I really enjoyed listening to it and hearing it and just being with these characters. I just really wished we got more, especially from some of the side characters, because they didn't feel as fleshed out as I feel like they could have been. But yeah, I thought this was a really great time. The next book that I read was my eARC copy of A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Thank you to NetGalley, the publisher, for that. And this is a horror novel that follows this woman who is returning to her family home, her grandmother's house that her mother currently lives in, because she has a break from one of her jobs. And upon returning to this house, she realized her mom is acting a little weird. She's not acting like herself. The house is identical to what it was like when she was a child growing up. You learn about kind of her relationship with her grandma, who has since passed, and there's creepy things going on with the house, with the neighbors, and there's these crows. It was so good. I really, really enjoyed this book. It reminded me a lot of The Hollow Places, not in plot, but just in vibes. It had that kind of creepy atmosphere, but there was humor throughout it. I just really love the way T. Kingfisher does her horror books like this, where you have these really uncomfortable, creepy moments, but then there's kind of like a little bit of humor laced throughout it that kind of break up that tension. And yeah, there's some very creepy scenes. I realize I'm terrified of sleep paralysis now, but I really, really enjoyed this. I think this comes out, I will put the release date. I know it's early next year. I want to say it's maybe April of next year. But yeah, if you love T. Kingfisher, definitely pick this one up. I thought it was just so good. I don't think I mentioned it. I gave that one like a 4.5. I just really, really enjoyed it. The next book that I listened to was probably my least favorite book of the month, and that is Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. I will be in the minority of this because this book has a very high rating on Goodreads. This is a horror novel that follows a mother who lost her son in a car accident, and she still visits the site of his death. She accidentally cuts herself once and realizes that by kind of sacrificing blood, she can actually bring her son back from the dead for a little bit. After this, she learns that the more she sacrifices, the longer he kind of comes back, and you may or may not realize that things are not as they seem with him returning. I really didn't like this. I listened to the audiobook and I just did not like the progression of the story. The choices that this main character made did not make sense to me with the evidence of what was happening to her son or with her son or who she thinks was her son. I just didn't think the way the story progressed made sense with the results that were happening from her sacrifices. So for me, I didn't really particularly like this. I didn't enjoy listening to it. I didn't like the ending. I just didn't really like it. So that was not a book for me, 100%. I just could not get behind that book. I think it was 100% a me thing, but yeah, that one was not for me at all. After that, I listened to the audiobook of The Weight of Blood by Tiffany G. Jackson. This is a Carrie retelling that follows a girl in high school. She has been hiding that she is biracial, and when that kind of is released to the school, she is bullied because of this. And there's a situation that we are led up to on prom night where she is brought by the popular quarterback of the team to prom night, and we know something happened on prom night. There is a big podcast element of this that is years in the future talking about what happened during this situation at prom. And it is a Carrie retelling. I've never read Carrie, so I don't know the comparisons on that way, but I do think the audiobook is really, really good. That podcast element is really well done, kind of bringing the story through it. I just didn't love reading this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars because I think there was a lot of good talk on the differences in bullying, what constitutes bullying, what people think is bullying and what isn't, even though really when you look at it, everything that they're talking about is a type of bullying. There's a lot of talk on racism. It was really well done in the talks of that. I just didn't love the plot direction, I guess. We know that something big happened at prom night, and I guess I just was not surprised when the actions that happened during prom night happened. There is a love story that happened within the story that I felt wasn't as developed as I would have liked. I think it happened a little too quickly for my tastes. But overall, I thought it was a fine read. I thought it was really interesting. The audiobook is really well done. I just didn't love the progression of the story as much as I think as I could have. The next book that I listened to was The Border Keeper by Kristen Hall. This is a fantasy novella that follows this man with a troubled past that looks for the border keeper, who is basically a protector of the world against kind of a monster-like world. She is this woman that is basically protecting this world from getting attacked by creatures. She can border hop, she can go to different dimensions, and her and this man kind of strike up a friendship as he is trying to find something from his past. When they are going to these other dimensions, secrets come to light, and it kind of brings some really dark things that could affect all of these worlds that this woman can jump to. And I thought this was just fine. I think I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I thought it was a really interesting story. I just really felt disconnected from all of these characters. I don't know if it was the audiobook itself. I just really had a hard time focusing on this story. I couldn't really feel anything for these characters or care what happened to them. I'm really sad about that because I absolutely loved Star Eater by this author. Maybe this is because this is a novella versus a full-length novel, or maybe because I listened to the audiobook. I just really had a hard time focusing on this one. I did not care very much about it, even though I thought it was interesting, the fact of jumping to these different worlds and things just being so different from the world that they're coming from, what was going on with this character and why he wanted her to help him. So I don't know, I liked the friendship that kind of happened between these 2 characters, but other than that, I just really struggled finding any interest in this story. And then after that, I finally picked up a book that I physically own, and that is The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the Inheritance trilogy. This follows a woman who is summoned to the capital by her grandfather after her mother dies, and she is surprised that she is named an heir like her cousins because she never expected to be one of these. So she is kind of thrown into this inheritance. So she is thrown into this power struggle against her cousins and has to kind of deal with the politics of the city that she never grew up knowing, unlike her cousins. I really, really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I loved the main character. I cannot think of her name at the moment. There is a kind of love story in this. Again, I just love N.K. Jemisin's writing. This reminded me why I love her so much, because the 5th season, the Broken Earth trilogy, is one of my favorite series of all time. And I'm just so happy that I loved this one so much. I don't think I liked this one as much as the 5th season Broken Earth trilogy, but I just really loved these characters, really loved the plot. The way this is written, I just think N.K. Jemisin's writing is beautiful and so well done. And yeah, this one was just so good, 5 stars. Can't wait to read the next 2. The next one that I read was Such Pretty Flowers by K.L. Sierra. This is an adult horror novel. I got an e-arc from NetGalley, and I believe this comes out February 7th, maybe. I'll put the release date then. So this follows a woman who is investigating the apparent suicide of her brother. Even though the police ruled it as a suicide, she is not sure that that is really what happened. And so she starts getting close to her brother's ex-girlfriend, and there's a weird attraction that ends up happening between the 2 of them as she is trying to figure out what her brother meant by his last text, that his girlfriend wanted to play a game with him, and kind of what that meant, see if there is something weird going on there. And I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It is a little slow in the beginning, and it is a little hard to get into the voice of this main character. I didn't love reading from her point of view at first, but then I really did kind of follow into it, really enjoyed the weird, twisty things that happened in this book. It gets weird, and I liked that. I loved that aspect of it. But if you're going into this thinking like, oh, there's games going on with it, it's not so much about that. It is really a more psychological, weird horror about this woman and her weird attraction to her brother's ex-girlfriend and what really happened to her brother. I really enjoyed this. It is 4 stars. I thought it was such a fun, interesting read. So if you want something a little weird, I definitely recommend that one. The next one that I read, I actually listened to the audiobook of Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. And I am not gonna give this a rating right now. This is a collection of short stories about women and their bodies and kind of their place in society. I was really out of it when I listened to this book, and I just cannot seem to really focus on most of these. I do remember a couple stories, one of them about a pregnant woman on a boat and a girl dealing with her skin. I remember it being weird, but like I was on a trip, I wasn't feeling good during the trip, and I listened to this on the plane and in the hotel, but I was really sick in the hotel, so I don't remember a lot about this one. But I picked up the library copy, my library had one, and I'm actually going to reread this in November because I could not focus on this story. It's pretty short, so I'm actually going to reread this one physically because the audiobook was just not working for me. I don't really know how I felt about this, but I did read this technically. I don't feel good talking about it too much, giving it a rating, because I was so unfocused while I listened to this that I really want to reread it because I loved this author's other book, Our Wives Under the Sea, that I want to give this one a chance. So it's hard for me to really talk about this one right now. Next, I listened to the audiobook for In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens. This is a YA fantasy that follows this prince who is going kind of on a coming of age tour. And a lot of things happen during this coming of age tour. He meets a boy that was held captive who jumps overboard. He thinks he'll never see this boy again, but he ends up running into him. Our main character, our prince, is kidnapped, is saved by the other boy. Secrets come about, and they kind of have to work together to stop a war. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I feel like there was just way too much going on for the amount of pages this was. It was very fast paced. There is this relationship that happens between the prince and this boy, and I did think it was cute. I just could not follow it very well. The plot was a little all over the place for me. You know, he is trying to do the right thing after being kidnapped, but it didn't really make sense, some of the choices that he made, because he would decide, oh no, I'm gonna stay hidden, but then immediately went to his family to tell him that he was alive. And I don't know, the progression of the story just didn't make sense. The ending was a little anticlimactic, and yeah, this one was just fine. I think I gave it like 3 stars. I did not love this one as much as I loved So This Is Ever After. I loved So This Is Ever After. That one was such a fun book. This one is a lot of fun too, but at the same time, like, it didn't make sense. The plot just didn't make sense to me. So I gave it 3 stars. It was fine, but not my favorite. The next book that I listened to was The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This is a adult sci-fi novel that follows this woman who is dealing with the divorce of her husband after she finds out that he has been cheating on her with the clone he made of her. Basically, then has to deal with his death by the hands of her clone. And I ended up giving this 3 stars. I thought this was fine. I guess I just never saw the point of it. It's very slow, I think. I just really had a hard time getting to care about these characters. It felt very repetitive at times with the descriptions, especially of her clone. So this main character is talking about her clone, what her clone is like, because she is everything that the main character didn't want to be. And that's why her ex-husband made her. And it was just really repetitive after a while. It kind of just kept talking about how she was, why she was this way. And I just kind of lost interest for a lot of it. And yeah, I just really didn't care very much about this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars because I thought it was well done and it was interesting, but I just really didn't care about the book that much. And I expected something really shocking to happen. I swear when I first heard about this book coming out and everyone was reading it, everyone was like shocked by how weird it got, and I felt like it didn't get that weird. So maybe I just went into this with the wrong expectations, but yeah, that was 3 stars, fine, I guess. The next one that I read was Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. I ended up actually getting a e-arc of this, but I had already pre-ordered it because I absolutely loved Winter's Orbit last year. But this is a standalone book in the same universe as Winter's Orbit that follows the basically forced conscription to the military of this character. He is called a reader, so he can feel and see emotions, and that is kind of looked down upon. But if you were a writer, which is someone who can kind of influence emotions, they are kind of seen as a little bit better than readers. But our reader is conscripted into the military and kind of forced into this sync, which is kind of like a mind meld kind of thing, where they are, I don't know, it's kind of like almost like a forced marriage situation. and he's basically desperate to get out of it. The other character is the writer. His name is Surratt, I think is how you pronounce it. And he learns that the reader is forced to do this, and so they kind of work together to get this character out of it. And this was just so good. I am not even barely scratching the surface of what happens in this book. The synopsis is so long for this book, but I just loved these characters. There is a very slow burn kind of romance between the two of them as they work together to try to free this character from being conscripted in the military without really getting either of them in trouble. There is a war brewing, which seems to be half the books I read is they're trying to stop war. But I just really, really loved this book because these characters are just so interesting to follow as they fall in love and just try to save each other, try to protect each other, and fall in love kind of without meaning to. There's that situation with the war that they are trying to stop. There's just so much that went into this. I just really love this one, and so I don't really know what else to say about it, but I just loved it. 5 stars. It was great. And then the next one that I read was finally another book that I own, Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. This one I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed this little novella. This is about a 12-year-old boy who sees his father in full Blackfeet regalia in their home after his death. And he is basically trying to figure out how to keep his father coming back. But he learns a lot of things about not only his dead father, but about himself, about his heritage, and about his younger brother. And I really enjoyed this. I think this book packed so much in such a little bit amount of time. It's talking about heritage, it's talking about knowing your parents, what your parents are really like, and what they will do for each other, and your connection to your family. I really, really enjoyed this one, so I gave it 4 stars. It's hard to talk about it too much because it is so short. It does kind of read, it was a little hard for me to read at the beginning because it feels like you're in the mind of a 12-year-old. So it was a little all over the place, but I think it worked for the atmosphere of the story. The only reason that I gave it 4 instead of 5 is there is a section near the end that we kind of jump that I think could have been expanded on to get us, I don't know, get a better emotional impact for it. So I ended up giving that 4 stars. I think it was really well done, great story, just a really, really well done novella. All right, I'm getting there. I'm almost done talking about these damn books. I then read the graphic novel Blackwater by Jeanette Arroyo and Ren Graham. This is a horror fantasy graphic novel that follows these 2 boys as they are trying to figure out the weird happenings in their town. There are werewolves, there is a ghost, there's a ton of high school dramas, it says on the back, and there is a little romance that happens between these 2 characters. And I really didn't like this. I ended up giving it 2 stars, 2.5 stars. All of those 2.5 stars were because of this character right here, Marcia. She was the best part of this book. She was this goth that was really into all of the spooky stuff. And she is the only reason that I actually liked this book. I really didn't like these 2 characters. They were very mean to each other, kind of insufferable to follow. There is some relationship dynamics with their parents that I really didn't like, that never really got addressed. And yeah, I'm really sad I didn't like this. The story itself, I just really didn't like. So I ended up giving this one like a 2.5. It wasn't the worst thing I ever read. I just really didn't like it. I will say, I love her and I would read anything about her because she was hilarious. And then I think the last one, I think I've talked about them all, is The Honeys by Ryan Lasala. This might be my favorite book of the month. This is a YA horror that follows this gender fluid character named Mars, who is trying to figure out what happened to his sister after his sister attacks him. Mars and his sister both attended this kind of prestigious summer camp until something happened that caused Mars to refuse to ever go back. Their sister still went back and joined kind of this girls group at the camp called the Honeys. Mars believes that the Honeys are the reason that his sister changed and started acting weird, and so he basically decides to return to this camp and kind of fit themselves into the role of boy at this camp because this camp is so gender strict. They are male and female, boy and girl, and that is it. And so they're kind of forcing themselves to fit into this role so they can return to this camp and figure out what happened to their sister. And I really, really loved this. I thought it was so interesting, not only the talks on being gender fluid, fitting yourself into a mold, trying to be authentic to yourself, and all of that, but I really liked the talks of friendship. There is a small romance subplot in this that I enjoyed. It is very creepy with the bees. And if you can, listen to the audiobook for this. I listened to the audiobook and read it kind of at the same time. And there is sound effects in this book, in the audiobook, that has like the bee sounds and trumpets and whispering, and ooh, it was so creepy. It really, really helped like bring the atmosphere for this book, and I just really enjoyed it. I loved reading it. 5 stars. I thought it was just so well done, which is really surprising to me because I have read a Ryan Lasala book before and didn't really like it, but yeah, this one was everything I like. I like YA horror. I just think it really works for me. So yeah, 5 stars, loved this. So yeah, probably my favorite book of the month. So there you have it. There are the books that I read for the month of October. It is not very many that I owned. Hopefully next month I will actually work on reading the books I own, because that is what I want to do, even though I will focus on rereading this one because I really want to give it a chance. I just was not in a good headspace when I read that one. But overall, I think I didn't have too bad of a reading month. I read a lot of horror, I read a lot of fantasy. I'm back in it, hopefully. So that is it for all the books that I read. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite or even least favorite book of the month is. I would love to hear it, and I will see you next time.